Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video finds you well and in very good spirits wherever you are in the world. And today, if you don't mind, I would very much like to continue on with our journey, our discussions, our discoveries, and our explorations with respect to the recent releases made by the Criterion Collection during this year of 2022. That brings us to that title, which has been designated by Criterion under this new release by them at spine number 1123. This is a work from 1976, and the name of the filmmaker is Joseph Losey. And the name of the work is, in English, Mr. KLEIN, or in French, Monsieur KLEIN. This is the extraordinary work from the year 1976, and it is from the writer Franco Solinas and director Joseph Losey, and also the actor and also producer, one of the producers of this work, that is Alain Delon. And Alain Delon portrays the main character of Robert KLEIN in this work, which is Monsieur KLEIN. And once again, I must extend to you my deepest apologies for my poor pronunciation of the French language, but I will do my very best to respect the proper pronunciation. But if I make a mistake, and I know I will, please forgive me. Monsieur KLEIN is a very startling and cold and unrelentingly unforgiving work, in a manner of speaking. It in this way that paints in sort of chilling paint stroke, brushstroke ways. It portrays this world that is, as I say, filled with menace, filled with fear, also filled with a sense of unknown, and also a sense of a type of frightening passivity, passive nature. And when we understand that these themes or these tones are applied to a story set in Paris, or set in France, set in Paris, during 1942, or to be more specific, during the early winter months of 1942, the early part of 42. We understand that this is a period of history of the war, in World War II, and also German occupation forces, and also in France, the Vichy government. And so we have in this context the story of Robert KLEIN early on in Paris. We understand too early on that he is working with art dealer, art dealings, and artifacts, works of art. And also we understand that through a set of circumstances, maybe these are random, maybe not, who knows, that is part of the mystery of the unknown, almost to the sense of what is often described as the absurdity or the Kafkaesque nature of this particular, say, depiction of the world, the film Monsieur KLEIN. Through these set of circumstances that we are hinted at, or we get hints of, or maybe even direct references to very early on in the film, Robert KLEIN, the Alain Delon character, seems to be mistaken for, or he is the subject of a mistaken identity, in that there is a Jewish person named, another person named Monsieur KLEIN, with the same last name. And it seems that the Robert KLEIN, the Alain Delon character, seems to be mistaken for this other Monsieur KLEIN, who is Jewish, again, during 1942 and Vichy France. So this is this has a lot of consequences and significant impact on all the parties concerned, because there is much danger and peril, and that is slowly, or perhaps not slowly, perhaps quite rapidly, in fact, building up against the Jewish population that is currently in France, or currently in Paris, during this period of 1942. And again, 1942 is a very, very significant year in the context of this history. So, given this, then, the Robert Klein character, the Alain Delon character, is essentially on the lookout. He is searching for this other figure, this other person, in order to maybe to clear up this mistaken identity situation, because from the vantage point of maybe certain aspects of the government or the officials, or maybe police inquiries, or maybe slowly too his close circle of people and associates, work and private associates, etc. Slowly, the confusion begins to spiral almost out of control in terms of who is really who. Who is this Monsieur Klein? Who is Robert Klein, the Alain Delon character? When he tries to find an answer, it leads to more questions. Maybe there is a sense of the unknown and the quizzical, and the maybe the absurd and the outrageous, and maybe even also the funny and the comedic as well. And also at the same time, there is the chilling and the frightening and the bleakness, because during his search, we understand a number of things emerging. First of all, the very direct and quite terrible and vicious anti-Semitism is expressed through various, say, episodes that are balanced and that are set forth throughout this work, to show how terrible these attitudes are, and that are being expressed by maybe certain characters in the film, and to varying degrees as well. So this is one aspect. And as Robert Klein, the main character, has to traverse through this landscape in order to, in essence, to try to find who is this mysterious Monsieur Klein, this other figure, if indeed that is the case, and that is also part of the mystery. But in order to try to find the answer, or his answers to these questions, to these mysteries, he traverses through this world, and indeed we as viewers go through this world, and it does have a very, very disturbing elements of anti-Semitism that are expressed, as I say, in certain episodes of the story arc and plot dynamics of this work, Monsieur Klein. So in that way, this is a very effective and quite a powerful and very disturbing work that has a lot of effect, even to this very day. So that is one aspect. And then another aspect too is the way in which this film shows the almost breakdown, if you will, of, say, human relationships, human character relationships, in direct manners, and also in maybe in almost abstract existential manners as well. So when I say direct manners, I'm talking about the story arc that is traversed in the context of 1942 Vichy government France, leading up to what will happen in terms of the historical context. And again, we'll talk about that in the discussion of the supplements, because the supplements are brilliant in terms of providing a historical context, and there's certain events that are very, very key in 1942. And I'm speaking of the Rafle du Vel livre from 1942, which is the roundup and arrest of 13,152 Jewish men, women, and children by the French police on July 16th and 17th, 1942. So this is known as the Vel livre roundup, which is a key and significant and terrible moment. And it is indeed one of those historical moments that is dealt with in the trajectory and the context and of this work, Monsieur Klein. However, it is dealt with in a very, in a very interesting way, because we have the way in which this film treats history directly, but at the same time, it also at the same time uses maybe a dramatic or uses the idea of cinematic art and poetry in order to depict these very serious situations, and oftentimes the application of cinematic poetic, say, style or techniques uh, are sometimes reflective of an actual historical precedent, or they can be maybe artistically away from some kind of quote unquote accurate historical precedent. So sometimes we might get aspects of the film that are dealing with or touching upon history in a direct quote unquote accurate way in terms of factual depictions. But sometimes too we get depictions of history or depictions of events that are maybe on purpose not so accurate. And indeed, Joseph Losey does speak to this in some of the comments that we find in later supplements. And so this is, I think, a very interesting way in which Monsieur KLEIN, the film, operates in terms of history. We have a work that is dealing with, and very much dealing with, the harsh, or trying to deal with, or present what it was in terms of the harsh realities of the actual situation at the time. But at the same time, it acknowledges that it is a work of art, that it is a piece of cinema that is being released in 1976, so many, many years after the actual historical events that it is touching upon. So in many ways, I think that type of balance between quote unquote depicting of accurate depictions of historical events on the one hand, and then also at the same time in parallel a type of almost seemingly purposeful application of cinematic art or dramatic art that might be said to be deviating away from the historical accuracy. I think that is, in many ways, it could be said to be striking a very almost respectful tone to something that is very grave and very serious, almost saying, and my sense as a viewer subjectively is that it's almost saying to me that, this is a film, while the film is trying to show with respect and deep reverence the gravity of these situations that did occur in history. At the same time, it is a film, and a film is in no way meant to replace or meant to take over what actually happened. And so I think that in that way, this film serves a very interesting example of the way in which a cinematic art that is using as its form a type of narrative, fictional narrative story structure, how it can still maintain a sense of the cinematic art form in the context of the fiction narrative structure, while at the same time, with great respect, trying to touch upon these very terrible and very horrific aspects of history that did occur in the past. So I think it strikes that divide and strikes that balance quite well. And indeed, Joseph Losey does mention this in the later, in some of the supplements, which we'll talk about later, in terms of how this was one of the aspects of the film that was maybe criticized by some in the film critic circle. But he does mention this in that way. So we'll talk a little bit about that later. But that is one way in which this film, I think, another way in which this film operates so brilliantly in terms of its direct nature with history and the like. And also, I mentioned too, there's an indirect way, or maybe a more, there is a type of existential way in which this film also operates. Now, this is also very important too, because this goes into this idea of the absurd and the unknown and the creepy and the weird and the inexplicable and unexplainable. Things that happen all of a sudden that are totally, that totally upend one's world, but then they really have this terrible, terrible effect. And so one has to question what's going on. This is the sort of the journey, or this is the trajectory of Robert Klein. Something happens that he doesn't know why it's going on, and yet he has to try to get to the bottom of this. He has to try to find the answer because it could affect him most severely and most directly. And so he's trying to find these answers. And so in this context, he finds different he tries to ask different people, but then slowly those relationships begin to erode and begin to disintegrate. And that is also, too, due to the fact of the Vichy government era, and that adds a stinging level of sting. But also, when we think about it in a maybe literary context in terms of the construction of the film, the phrase Kafkaesque, in reference to the Franz Kafka, this has also been applied because this work or the story can be said to be in that way dealing with the unknown, the absurd, things that can happen all of a sudden, and that seem to have maybe point to a sense of the random absurdity of applications of organs of bureaucracy. Also, the almost the vicious nature of such random or seemingly random applications of almost brute force bureaucracy, and also how this can have a way of truly affecting the individual on a very existential level. And what I mean is that the application of these sort of brute force organs of bureaucracy on an externality level can have an impact on the individual sense of self, such that to the point of a type of almost differing nature in how one views oneself over time because of these really terrible pressures. It's this idea too of the almost the random and absurd nature of society writ large versus the individual, and how this is expressed in these almost comedic and quite weird ways. But these are weird ways that, again, we as individuals sometimes cannot explain. And try as we might to find those answers, sometimes we might find answers, sometimes we might not. And so that is, I think, the very context and essence of a type of existential question that is on display by Robert Klein and his quest, and indeed, therefore, by extension, by us as we as viewers are privy to this particular journey or quest or inquiry into the mystery of Monsieur Klein. Who is Monsieur Klein? Where is Monsieur Klein? Why is Monsieur Klein? And all of these circumstances come together: the war, Vichy, what is going on with the Jewish population during this time, 1942, and the context of history, as well as the idea of the absurd, the unknown, the search for answers, and the mystery, and answers leading to more questions, etc. And so it becomes this spiral that is captured with such vivid force in this work, the Losey work, Monsieur Klein. And I should mention, too, the performances are truly brilliant. We will talk a little bit more about the performances maybe when we get to the supplement section, but Alain Delon is remarkable. He is so remarkable here. I mean, there are things that he is doing in terms of the way in which his face registers, or indeed remains registerless on purpose with regard to specific circumstances that are happening around him at a given moment. And there is so much, therefore, that one reads into his face that becomes this complex interpretation, exercise of interpretation on the part of the viewer, that makes this work so fascinating. And I think that is so important too, because there is a sense too, always of the ambiguous and the ambivalent. Ambiguity and the ambivalent. And this is really important because we are dealing with a period that things are not what they seem. And because things are not what they seem, then as a performance, Alain Delon, it seems, in order to be consistent with that type of rendering or reading, must therefore provide a performance that is so nuanced, such that it might seem on the exterior that he is thinking one thing, but in fact, he might be feeling or thinking or doing or seemingly doing something quite contrary. And so that type of sense of the ambivalence or the ambiguity is very key when one is speaking about, or one of the readings, I think, it's key to one of the readings, one of the possible readings of his character, Robert Klein. And in that way, indeed in many other ways too, but in that way, as an example, Alain Delon's performance is magnificent. So we are getting so much going on here. And then, of course, bringing together under the direction of Joseph Losey, this is a a powerful work, and it's painted in these brushstrokes that really portray the bleak, the sinister, the cold, the unknown, and also the notion of movement and the quest, and also drama and cinematic art on the one hand, and also touching upon aspects of history. Accuracy, whether one calls it quote unquote accuracy or inaccuracy, in any event, it is a work. It is a cinematic work. It is a fiction narrative work that is, of course, taking as its sort of influence actual aspects, of history and these grave and significant events of history. So in that way, it is a very towering and powerful, very powerful work of art indeed. This is the work which is Monsieur KLEIN. The Criterion Collection has released this film, Monsieur KLEIN, on this new Blu-ray edition at spy number 1123. And this is purported to be based on a new 4K digital restoration with uncompressed monaural soundtrack, excuse me. Now, I've already removed, prior to the start of recording this video discussion, the fold-out insert that is part of this Criterion release. And let me now read from the insert where it talks about the restoration here. About the restoration, and I quote, Monsieur KLEIN is presented in its original aspect ratio of 1.66 to 1. This 4K restoration was undertaken by Studio Canal and from the 35mm original camera negative and the 35mm sound negative, etc. So this is the 4K restoration. Now, unfortunately, my experience with the film is very, very limited, so it's not possible for me to compare it with, say, earlier frames of reference. Unfortunately, I've never, for instance, seen this film in the theater, maybe, so I can't have that frame of reference. So it's hard to judge for me regarding the restoration itself. However, what I can say is that from the vantage point of the themes of the film, as I interpret them to be, which are the idea of uncertainty, the idea of absurdity, the idea of the frightening chill factor, and the bleakness that is associated with the existential themes, the existential threats, as well as the direct threats on a historical basis in the context of 1942 Vichy France, I can say that the color palette and the tones and the feel seem to be very well embodied in the context of this restoration or this presentation. So I feel a chill when I see it, and I think that is well regarded, or it's well presented in what we see on the screen. And I feel, therefore, that that is in keeping with, or there is a strong sense of consistency with the themes in question. So I don't feel any kind of distraction or anything of the sort. However, again, like with many other works, my knowledge base is very limited in terms of quote-unquote accuracy of color palettes, etc. However, that being said, I'm very overwhelmed on an emotional basis, again, based on how I perceive the consistency exists between the presentation aspect and also the emotional resonance and the maybe the social or political themes, and also the existential themes that are taking place within this Losey work. So in that way, I was very taken, and I am taken. I'm very glad, therefore, that the Criterion Collection has been able to release it in this fashion in its physical media catalog. So that's that aspect of this release. Now, with regard to the supplements that are included here, now there are a number of supplements here, so let us go through them one at a time. The first is a section in the supplement submenu with I think, the title of Making Monsieur KLEIN. And here we have a number of sub-menu options with regard to, as I say, the making of the film. So the first of such options is described as being from Pour le Cinéma, and this is also described as being from April 1976. And this is totaling approximately 12 minutes. And this features Alain Delon and also features Joseph Losey, and they're speaking. And in they're speaking, of course, in their own perspectives about their approaches and the stylings of this film, Mr. Clam. So, for example, Joseph Losey speaks here about what he perceives to be the different styles that are embodied within this film, Monsieur Clown, and using the words one of such styles being described as the horrifying, another being described as the unreality of the situation, and yet another such style being the abstract. And I found that to be very well, one of many great comments that can be found here in this supplement, because, or this this archive interview, because I think that shows the multi-layered complexity of the work, and also speaks to this idea of a purposefully applied unreality. Now, this is also maybe making reference to the fact that there are moments that are undoubtedly maybe taking liberties with the actual facts of history. That's one aspect. However, it is not a type of gross underestimation of the historical points, but on the contrary, it seems to be a cinematic artistic rendering of, or interpretation, or an impression of history. And I think that is a very key point. And it seems to be purposefully applied, and I think we can get a hint of that by virtue of the fact that Losey and company in places like this are describing the quote-unquote unreality as a type of purposely applied unreality. And I think that is necessary when one thinks of the artistic-based calculus that must be taking place in the minds of these great artists like Losey and company, because they must be thinking, or I can imagine that the possibility is that they might be thinking that this idea of unreality will therefore link very comfortably with the notion of the absurd or the abstract. So, and thus leading to the chill or the horrifying. So it seems to be this really wonderfully well-constructed work, really well-constructed work indeed. So, and then going on to speaking about the idea of, say, Alain Delon as a real creative force behind this work, serving also as a producer as well as the actor, the main actor here. And I love too how he refers to Joseph Losey as Joe. In some parts, he talks about Joe. That was very, very cool. And also the idea too of Losey as an American director, who of course had experience making films on many parts of the globe, but also he had his own, say, professional and personal difficulties with regard to his own career, and that's also discussed a little bit here, and also discussed a little bit elsewhere by Simon, etc. But one of the aspects that I think Delon points out very interestingly is the working relationship between Losey and Delon, and indeed Losey in making this film, because it is a French language film, and Losey is described as not speaking the language, French language, and so that is a very interesting circumstance. However, one can see from the final, the end product, if you will, the result, that there is that didn't serve as any kind of impediment to the creative forces on hand by Losey and company. On the contrary, it seems to be something of, and I think this is hinted at here and elsewhere too, maybe this also gives Losey the perspective of a type of quote-unquote outsider, which I think is also very necessary. It also gives a sense of distance too, which is also, I think, very necessary, and it serves the intensity and even the sensitivity of the subject of the plot very, very strongly and very effectively. So it's a very interesting aspect that is brought up here. Also, in terms of the content of the film, we have this idea of the society being depicted that seems to be gradually and maybe even quite rapidly as the film progresses, displaying signs of indifference to suffering. And this might be said to be something that is not necessarily limited to the historical period of the film, 1942, unfortunately. And so this becomes one of the messages of the film. Also, this idea of depicting racism, or in the words of, say, Delon or Losey and company, about the stupidity of racism, to borrow their phrase. So this, for these and other reasons, this, and also we get a sense too of the real dynamic between Losey and Delon. And it's a brilliant, really, really brilliant maybe discussion or archive set of interviews. So please check this out if you can. This is the 1976 Pour le Cinéma section from that's approximately 12 minutes. And then moving on, we have another interview or sub-menu interview. This is with the editor, Henri Lanouet, and this is described as being from 2021. It is a Studio Canal produced interview supplement, I understand. So it's not a Criterion supplement per se, but it's great to still have it here because Lanouet, in this 26-minute supplement, is going through so many things. Again, as editor, he had, of course, very privy to a lot of information about the production, about the philosophy behind the work, Losey and his philosophy behind the work. Also, some background about Losey himself. He talks about meeting the director for the first time, also mentioning to, referring to Losey's own background and history, being blacklisted in the United States, and then also working with Alain Delon. And so he also, Henri Lanouet too, also mentions his own personal childhood memories and the war. And this is a very interesting avenue of the interview discussion because what this leads to is, he talks about life under the occupation, or he talks about his own memories of living under the occupation in occupied France. And he also mentions too that maybe Losey did not necessarily have that same personal biographical experience in Losey's own life, but Henri Lanouet did. Now, what that meant, however, is that at the same time, someone like Henri Lanouet could recognize and identify where certain parts of the story, Monsieur Klein, were quote-unquote historically accurate, and where other parts of the story, Monsieur Klein, were quote-unquote historically inaccurate. So that is, I think, a really, really very fascinating point to be made. However, I don't think Henri Lanouet doesn't use that as a means to criticize the film. On the contrary, I think it is meant to show his respect to the cinematic process and the idea of art, cinematic art, being influenced by history. And sometimes showing that influence either by showing it through maybe a seemingly factually accurate presentation or using a more impressionistic take. And I think here in Monsieur Klein, we have, in an interesting way, a combination of both approaches. So that's very interesting as well. Also, he speaks here in this interview about the working method of Losey, how there weren't a lot of shooting takes. And also he speaks about this idea of Losey hardly ever shot what he referred to as a safety take. And so it seems like there was a real economy of work ethic that was being displayed here, which is really fascinating. And also Delon, you mentioned how Delon said that this was his best film, and I think it shows in terms of the grandness of performance. And also there is mention too of an example. There's a very famous or infamous scene involving a cabaret performance here in Monsieur Klein. So this idea of what the music would be, and there was some interesting anecdotal information about that and other aspects here. So this interview with the editor, Henri Lanouet, please check it out if you can. It's approximately 26 minutes. It's wonderful, 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 wonderful. And then continuing on with the supplement section's discussion, we next get a supplement section which is called Joseph Losey and Michel Simon. And in this, we have other subsections. So you click on it, you can go, and the first place you can go is Michel Simon. And this is described as being, it's a 48-minute or so interview with Michel Simon, who is a critic, a film historian, expert in many fields, including the works of Losey. And this is also described as being a Studio Canal supplement. Still, it's great to have it carried over here. And he speaks, of course, about Losey, about the career of Joseph Losey. He describes him as being, I love this phrase, the most European of U.S. directors. That's really fascinating. Difficult to categorize, he also mentions here. He also speaks a little bit about Losey's background, coming from what he describes as a, quote, aristocratic American family, but with a social conscience due to the cross section between the history of his own family and the history of the United States and the world, in fact, globally, in the Depression. And so that meant that he was influenced, and he had his political affiliations were with the left, the political left, and the Communist Party early on, which then made him a target of McCarthyism in the mid 20th century of the United States. And so that affected his life and his career and the like. And so he had to find his film career elsewhere, outside of the United States. And ultimately that led him to his period abroad, and then his period also in France, etc., including his work, Monsieur Klein. So he talks, Michel Simon does talk about a type of really great trajectory, almost an overview of the career of Losey, which is very important. You know, it's almost like a nice primer to the works of career of Losey for anyone who is coming to the works of him for the first time. And I think Michel Simon, does a really grand job, a fine job indeed, as he always does, to explain in these lucid and wonderfully understandable ways the sort of the way in which one can bifurcate or basically subcategorize the works of Losey into various groupings. And so he talks about various very key works, even works that he is critical of, Simon, for one reason or another. So he does have a critical eye, but I think a very reasonable one. So he speaks about The Boy with Green Hair, the remake of M, The Go-Between, et cetera, and then leading up to Monsieur Klein, and also the collaboration with the writer Franco Solinas. Simon has an interesting almost critique or criticism of Losey's film-making approach. You know, he almost says that maybe one of the weaknesses of Losey could be said that he might have had a weakness when it came to judging or evaluating scripts. But again, as Simon explains, when Losey was able to find a great script, he really took off with it. And I think here we have with Mr. Klein, this is a way in which he's saying that the collaboration between writer and director was brilliant. And it certainly is, and you can tell from the ultimate incarnation that we have in the film itself. And then there's some interesting discussions here Simon makes regarding symbolism. There's a very early on we see this image of a bird, a vulture as it's described, pierced by an arrow, which seems to have a really great or a very kind of profound, I should say, profound significance in the context of the themes and the story. Also, Delon, he speaks about Delon here, Alain Delon, about how there seems to be prefigured throughout the works of Delon, you know, the great works, the great masterworks, this idea of the doppelganger. And so this means that even here in Mr. Klein, there's a notion of the double and what that means, a type of mirror or parallel or maybe a contrary or maybe negative force, whatever the case may be, depending on the viewer's interpretation. Really great. That is such a great observation. And also talking about the Delon performance as being so well crafted, sober and restrained. I think that's the phrase used. That is so great. Yes, and it's brilliantly so for that. And then also Simon speaks about what it referred to as the quote unquote historical inaccuracies. But it also serves the purpose in an interesting way in terms of the way in which cinematic art is used in an impressionistic way. And also it seems to be there's a sense that maybe the characters within the world, there is maybe an indifference to suffering, as Losey might have mentioned in an earlier supplement here. Simon mentions the ambivalence in terms of sympathies. I think it's the same or similar concept. And also the idea of Kafka, criticisms of inconsistency, and also the notion too of the treatment and handling of aspects of anti-Semitism. This is very key to a reading of this work. And then going back to this notion of the film doubles their literary roots here, the existential themes and the threats as well, maybe having influences or connections with the literary works of Conrad or Dostoevsky, and also then leading to going back to Losey, the man and the artist, how he did not speak French, the French language, but at the same time he was able as an artist to, as in the words of Simon, to absorb by osmosis the spirit of a country. Wow, that is so profound. So, I mean, the literary references are great here. The Losey connections are great here. The connections to Moby Dick and Doubles, Dostoevsky, Kafka, etc. Great, great, great. So the Simon interview, please check it out if you can. It is approximately, what did I say? It's approximately 48 minutes, yes. So please check it out if you can. And that's not all, because next we have it's called Losey and Simon. This is described as being from 1976. This is approximately 30 minutes. This is an audio interview excerpt. And here we have Losey speaking in English, and he's speaking, I think, with Michel Simon through an interpreter for the most part, although I think there's also some moments of English language speaking. But for the most part, we hear the voice of the interpreter, although we understand that this is an interview between Simon and then the interview subject being Losey. And so here we have discussions again about working with the writer, Salinas, and Franco Salinas, and also maybe the act of revising the script again, or reworking the script in certain aspects, working with Delon. Delon's characters being very complex, and so this is one of the key aspects of reading this film, Monsieur Klein, is the recognition of the complexity of the Delon character, Robert Klein. And then the working relationship with Delon is mentioned here, how there are some interesting ways in which Delon's personality seemed to have emerged during the course of their working relationship. How Delon maybe, he was, of course, there were times when he might have been very insecure in how Losey described it, maybe insecure about his performance or certain aspects. However, that would never get in the way of the generous nature of Delon. He was very generous. There was a moment that's shared here about Losey mentions about how he was maybe there was maybe a financial issue that he was undergoing at the time, but Delon was very, very quick to act and to save or to help out his professional and also personal colleague, who is Losey. So that is again a testament to the kindness of Delon, as well as the complex nature, and maybe even too the seriousness and the real professionalism that Delon seemed to have brought to his performance. Because not only is he the main actor in this film, he's also one of the producers. So there's a lot at stake here. And again, it paid off so well in terms of the wondrous nature and the grand nature of his performance. Also, there's mention here the cabaret sequence, which is a way in which Losey gets into discussion about how to depict aspects of anti-Semitism. I mean, he describes it as being a tricky thing. He doesn't want it to, he wants to have distance from that aspect, but he also wants to display it and he wants to show it. So this is, he talks about that complexity. And also talking about Paris, how to show Paris visually. But he talks a little bit about his associations with Kafka. I mean, he talks about certain works that he might have read in terms of the Kafka works, etc. So this is also very important indeed. So overall, we have this great audio interview, again, to supplement some of the other interviews that we had before, but it's very, very well done indeed. So please check it out if you can. This audio interview is approximately 33 minutes. And then continuing on with the supplements, there is a documentary which is described as being from 1986. It's approximately 1 hour and 23 minutes. And this is a documentary focusing in on a very significant and very significant point of history that is in regards to Vichy France during this period, World War II, and also as it relates, or it's included here because the story of Monsieur Klein has some very significant connection with this historical moment. And this documentary is called The Story of a Day, the Veldiv Roundup. And this is in reference to that moment in this is called the Raf du Veldiv, or the Veldiv Roundup. And as I had referred to earlier before, this is the roundup and arrest of 13,152 Jewish men, women, and children by the police in France on July 16th and July 17th, 1942. And this is according to also the Ginette Vincendeau essay, which is also part of the release here by Criterion. They were kept, these people who were rounded up, these 13,152 persons, were kept for 3 days in terrible conditions in the 15th arrondissement's Vélodrome d'Hiver Stadium before being sent to Auschwitz. So this is a very terrible and a significant and terrible event, and it is, as I say, very relevant to the story and construction of this work, Monsieur Klein. But also, it is very important, I think, to have a historical frame of reference, and so we have this documentary, which provides interviews and also first-hand accounts, as well as a type of a detailed presentation of events leading up to this period in July 1942. So this is, I think, a very important documentary, and I'm very grateful that it's also included here, because, as I say, this is a film that touches upon very grave subject matters, and so because of that, it's very helpful from a viewer perspective, also from a perspective of engaging with this work, to have that frame of reference. Now, as I mentioned before, this work takes certain aspects of history and presents them in maybe a quote-unquote accurate way, or maybe a more sort of dramatically a more sort of dramatic, cinematically dramatic way, let's put it that way, so maybe inaccurate in that manner. So, and I think that also has to do with, say, the timing of the way in which this particular set of circumstances, the Veldi Roundup, how this is presented or discussed or handled in this work, Monsieur Klein. So in that way, having a film like Mr. Klein, which is dealing with it in the context of the story of Robert Klein, the Alain Delon character, and then also being able to watch this documentary, Story of a Day, I think is very valuable and incredibly worthwhile in terms of this further exploration of this history, the subject matter, this period, as well as the themes and the conditions that are on display here. So it's well worth checking out if you can. Again, this is approximately 1 hour and 23 minutes. And now let us turn to the presentation, or the packaging itself of the Criterion release. This is the Blu-ray edition that I have. It is a single disc Blu-ray edition, and we have the insert, which I have also removed prior to the making or the starting of this video discussion. I have it in this plastic casing, and so we have here the plastic casing, and then of course the insert would go in to this compartment within the inner part of the plastic casing. I really admire this art very much. It has a type of warped reality, the abstract nature, the horrifying abstract nature that also gives a sense of the uncertain and the chilling and the horrifying, as well as the type of sense of a, as I say, the way in which reality seems to be changing before our very eyes, and indeed before the eyes of our main character here, the Alain Delon figure. And so this artistic rendering, I think, is magnificent, and it is continued on in the back. The use of the font as well, I think, is very well established indeed, and this motif is continued on into the inner fold-out leaflet. Let me point out the art director, Sarah Habibi, Eric Skillman, illustration, Gary Kelly, designer Eric Skillman. So well done for this as well. I think it's a really nice and very vivid presentation indeed. Now, with regard to the fold-out, again, I'm not a fan of the fold-out type. I much rather prefer the staple booklet type for reasons that I've mentioned elsewhere. But be that as it may, I think the essay that's included here is superb. I've mentioned it a little bit before, but this is the essay by Ginette Vincendeau. It's called "It's All in the Name." Once again, it's all in the name. This essay is magnificent. Once again, please watch the film first before checking out the essay, because it does delve into specifics of the film and the plot. However, after you've seen the film, please check out the essay. The Vincendeau essay is remarkable in that it touches upon so many aspects. It goes into various themes. It touches also on the history of Joseph Losey, his history and his career, which is also not in any degree insignificant, as has also been mentioned in other supplements by Simon, etc. And also it speaks to the specific historical bases of the plot. And it makes reference to Veldiv, which is also the roundup of Veldiv, which also has been referred to in other supplements, including the outstanding documentary, which you've mentioned earlier. And then it does talk about the specific themes interwoven into the film and plot discussions, and also its lasting legacy. Going forward in the context of this type of work, in the context of Losey filmography, Delon, etc., etc. Brilliant, brilliant essay all around. Once again, Ginette Vincendeu's essay, which is called "It's All in the Name." Please check it out if you can. And with that, my friends, this is an overall discussion of this new Criterion release during this year of 2022 of the work, which is Monsieur KLEIN. So please, 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 if you haven't had an opportunity to check out the work, Monsieur KLEIN, the Losey work starring Delon, please check it out. It is powerful. It is overwhelming. It is a very intriguing handling and interaction with history, as well as handling of very stark and very profound existential themes, as well as being a showcase for the artistic prowess of the artists involved, including Alain Delon and also including, of course, Joseph Losey. This is the work which is Monsieur KLEIN. Okay, my dear friends, so that's it for now. And so until we meet again, please be happy and healthy and well, and please keep on watching a lot of great, great movies. Thank you so much, as always, for your time. I very, very much appreciate it. Stay strong, stay safe, and cheers.